Hello to everyone, my name is Bodan Saroid. This is the channel of composition class with me, Dr. Bodan Saroid. And today we'll be focusing on Claude Debussy. This composer in particular is very well known for his innovations in harmony, texture, composition, and he's been labeled oftentimes with Ravel as an impressionistic composer, despite the fact that Debussy himself didn't really like that tag. This piece, Reverie, it's a short piano piece that features a quasi-nocturne feel that borderlines between what we might call romanticism, late romanticism, and this impressionistic style of Debussy. It kind of resembles a little bit the language of other composers such as Grieg, who was also experimenting with less traditional harmony at the time. And it features a quite interesting musical logic and construction that we'll be looking at right now. So without further ado, let's begin this analysis by listening to the first bit of the piece. But clearly that's kind of where the first phrase ends, so we'll put there a mark. And this opening without the melody points to something that resembles an introduction, so we can already write that down. Introduction, and here we can write that this is like the first section. We can give it letter A1. Right, it lasts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bars, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's 8 bars. Now we have this. Very beautiful harmony. Right, and that's where it basically ends. So that could be a second phrase. Again, it lasts 8 measures. It seems to be very symmetrical so far. And in this case, there's this sequence. And then it's lowered. Right. So we continue and we find this. And that could continue as a matter of fact it does, so I shouldn't have stopped there. Until we reach that chord, which clearly sounds already like something different. So in this case, I believe that we still preserve, well, the 8 measure organization, so that can be A3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the next bit. So far that's like the maximum point of tension and chromaticism. We've been building up from something very small. The introduction, then the melody, then slightly broader, then this, and eventually, right, and that's where we go. Right, so for me, that would be the last bit of section A, and it clearly achieves the goal, which is to modulate to a different key. We end in C in this case. That would be A4 with a cadence in the key of C major. So we add like four units formal units, they could be either periods or sentences. We'll look into that later. And now the melody is in the bass. So that sounds like a new section to me. So I'll put B, letter B, B1. It's got this suspenseful harmony. Augmented chord again. So probably by this point we are reaching a new section, and we could write B2 there. So we are, no, sorry, not there, but here. So it sounds like this. And then this is a very Debussy sound. That minor ninth chord. And we have a cadence eventually on F major, which is written here. So that's the end of B2, sorry. And now we have the final part, which is B3. Repeats again, so clearly a period. And we end there in a new key, in E major, right? Which is really far away from the original F major that was loosely defined there. So after that, we start a new part, which is this phrase. We can give it the next number, is B4. It starts here. We have a key signature change, although the melody continues with the same logic. A clear extension of the dominant, so we're standing there on the dominant. And after that, we go back to A. So basically this last bit, B4, we'll probably, once we get back to it, we'll try to split it into shorter units. We'll make sure to count that. But as such, it's this really large block that kind of presents a new material. And after that, we go back to A, which is a variation of A, so that's why I label it A prime. The main variation is that originally we had this, and now it's split. There are different ways you can play this. You can be crossing your hands around, or you could be splitting the melody between right and left, right? After this, we go back to a very similar opening. Well, this sounds exactly as A2. So I'll put A prime 2, because then it goes to a different key. That's the same. But here Debussy goes to E flat. Very sweet. And we arrive to what we can call coda. but this really is a variation of B. So here we have the coda, which is a variation of, it's almost like B prime, and the material clearly looks similar to B3, right? Which was that. Now it's here. And after that, well, we have the final cadence in the key of F major. Although F major is very loosely defined, and it's not like the main target of the piece. But rather what Debussy tries is to create ambiguity and play with the modal colors that are within the scale. So we'll be looking into that right now. The introduction actually presents a very simplistic formula that's consisted just of 4 pitches: B flat, C, D, and G. Now, there are different ways we can think of this. The easiest thing we can think of is G minor, right, with the B flat in the bass. And we could think of the C as a passing tone, which is just allowing us to connect B flat with D. This is the default harmony that we're going to be seeing throughout the first 6 bars. Then the music changes and moves down. So really this way of thinking of the first inversion chords helps us to understand the harmony. We can easily spot that F major is there with first inversion. Here we have E diminished with first inversion, and eventually will lead to the tonic. So harmonically it's not overcomplicated, it's just this harmonization of a descending scale, right? We can highlight these notes so we get to see them better, right? I'll highlight with yellow the first, gotta put the transparency. So you have B flat, then we have A, got G, and then F, right? So Debussy is clearly just doing a descending scale of a fourth. That fourth as an interval was already introduced here by contrary motion. So kind of remarkable how basically within the cell we have this ascending fourth, and then within the structure we have this descending large scale B flat, A, G, F scale. Now the interval of a fourth is particularly recurring into this piece, so I'll be using the blue arrow to highlight the fourths that we're seeing here. So clearly it's there, right? And of course it's within all of the patterns, because this accompaniment is always doing the fourth undulation, right? So I won't be highlighting it in the left hand, but in the right hand, once the accompaniment transfers, we still can see it, right? And it's like this fourth and that fourth. So we have, right? And that's also a fourth. Right? This is basically like 2 interlocked fourths. And the melody itself, right? It's a descending fourth, ascends up. Right there we have this fourth again, and it's just undulated. You have this undulation. That's another fourth. Right, and eventually will lead to the A, which we could connect to the previous point. So the big points are G as a starting point, right? So if we were to highlight this with pink, that's the starting point. Then we go to D, and then we go to A. That's fourth. Right, and that's kind of the quartal logic that's dominating this beautiful phrase. Now, when we listen to it, it sounds completely natural. built around these fours. It's really great. Now, that is the first phrase and, well, the first sentence, because in this case, we don't see a recurring pattern. So we have just this opening idea, and then we have like an antecedent and a consequent. Right, so I would label this sentence 1. And this sentence is a closing sentence, which is kind of unusual, thinking of the openness of the harmony. You might be wondering, like, well, usually, what's the difference between closing and opening? Closing sentences are the ones that go to the tonic, in this case F major. Opening ones would go to the dominant C. In this case, Debussy ends on a closing sentence, and the only reason that he does it is because he doesn't start on the tonic. We start with a very ambiguous sonority. This creates a lot of tonal ambiguity. The fact that we're starting with B flat, which is the 4th degree, and not even presenting the F as such until this bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, until bar 7. This is the first F that appears, right? It's here. In the right hand, then in the left hand. That creates a lot of ambiguity. And the way that we hear it really doesn't sound much as F major, right? When I play this, we don't think, oh, I'm an F major. But it rather sounds like we're in this G Dorian sound. Right? It could be easily harmonized as G minor, which kind of suits very nicely that. And implicitly, we are hearing and feeling that G minor here is this C major feel in G minor. Right, so I would label all of this first phrase as a G Dorian sonority. Now, G Dorian is the 2nd degree of a major scale. So if I'm doing F major, Dorian is the scale that starts on G. What makes G Dorian sound Dorian and not minor is the sharp 6. So if I were to play a minor scale, I would do this. That E flat is there. Right? And in the Dorian, apart from not having that leading tone, we don't have the flat 6, so it sounds like this. Right? That's the G Dorian scale. And it's the type of sonority that prevails in this opening by expanding that 2nd degree over 6 bars. And it has this mystery. It gives suspense to the music. And now we go to F major. We have then the dominant, and it's a very weak cadence. I mean, of course, I've labeled it as E diminished. Technically speaking, we can speak of C7, dominant 7th. We have all of the notes there. But it's very weak. It's inverted in 2nd position, 2nd inversion. Right? And it seems like a little parenthesis to have just this F major. Now, something to appreciate about this is that a lot of the times when students write nocturnes, they would just think of 2 things. The left hand doing the accompaniment all the time, and it seems to be the case in this piece, but that's not the case for this bar. We can clearly see how the left hand has these gaps, these silences that I really commend and I encourage to do. And the second thing is that inside, the inner rhythm also has these little pauses. If I were to remove them, nothing bad happens really there, but it would lose a lot of its character, right? And partially it would spoil the piece, because those silences, those pauses, that inner rhythm of syncopation is really what creates interest in the piece. More things about this introduction. Well, probably by this point you might be wondering, if you know the piece, why am I skipping these B flats and not saying anything about them? Well, foremost, they are very interesting notated. So if we pay a closer look, what we find out is that Debussy notates a B flat, after which technically there's a tie between this eighth note and that eighth note, but there's no tie as such between the outer B flat. So there are two ways of playing this. You could be doing or you could be interpreting, because the notation is ambiguous, that this tie prevails and it's also affecting that other note, and you would just do this. Which adds another extra level of ambiguity, because we're having this downbeat omitted. And it's clearly the case for these bars, so I would probably try to standardize it and play it all the way throughout without the repeated B flat. But well, the notation, I think, allows us to think of the B flat as a second instrument too. Like in this case, we have it repeated. Of course, there's no tie between Fs, and we played it twice. Another interesting element that proves Debussy's mastery about this theme is the use of triplets. When we write a lot of the times themes, we think that this is the grid, the time grid upon which everything stands, and all the rhythms are within that grid. And I could play that rhythm within the grid. It would sound like this. Nothing wrong, but it loses the expressivity and the flexibility that we can achieve by using something as simple as these triplets. Apart from giving us a nice, wonderful exercise of 3 against 4. So that's pretty much all I have to say about this phrase. We could keep talking about it because it's particularly compelling and beautiful. And, well, the direction has been defined. It's just a descending closing sentence that decays by fourth and leads us to A, which is also harmonized with this F major 6 that has the flavor of the fourths. Right, next, A'2. A'2 is a new phrase that starts in D. And it's not any D, it's a very particular sound. You can interpret this two ways. You can think of this as D minor, then A minor, and that would kind of, well, be very oversimplifying things. F major and G minor, right? So they're all root positions, of course. Well, apart from this F major, the F major is technically in first inversion. So that's kind of the way that we can split this into triads, but I would argue that this is all one single chord, and I feel it like a D minor 9th. So it's right, it actually goes there, and it blends and connects with that F major too. So all of those implicit triads are within the overall chord. And then we have the G minor. So D minor 9th again, and G minor. Very beautiful, very beautiful. And you might be wondering, why is it so beautiful? What is the logic behind that? Well, the first thing that explains the relationship between these chords is the relationship of the fourth. So I'll highlight it with the pink color, which we were using. Well, we had a fourth from B flat to F. Now we have one from D to G. D to G is always there. And that D to G, that fourth motion, is really telling us the inversion of what the right hand does. Right? So the right hand is clearly doing the opposite fourth, which is that one, and the left hand is doing an ascending motion, right? That beautiful contrary motion really sounds special. Now, How do we explain the other notes? The other notes also have a relationship of fourth. We can see it there. But I would rather just think of it as the G minor arpeggio, which is performed in the left hand. So it's just this descending motion of a fifth. Right? And fifth and fourth are, by the way, the same intervals. They're just inverted. So we could be arguing that, well, that's pretty much the same thing. Now, what is the key of this? Technically, from F major, we can explain it as second degree, and that is D minor being the sixth degree. But the way that we hear it, it sounds really like G Dorian. So it's the same chord, the same mode that we had before. It's a minor with a sharp sixth. So what is G Dorian doing here? G Dorian, it's the same sonority that we had at the beginning. So now that F major that initially, well, he's presenting to us like this is a perfect, well, this is a cadence on the tonic, no? It really sounds like a half cadence within this G world. It's the G Dorian. Doesn't end on F, it would end on G. And after that, just to continue with the feel of the F major, Debussy does end on the dominant. And does end on the 5, which is C7 here. But this is particularly interesting because he is doing this set of perfect cadences. So in reality, it's a sequence. It's unbelievably classical, right? But it doesn't sound so because of the harmony that he's using there. It's not a seventh, it's a ninth chord that he's implying there. That's the ninth chord that goes to tonic. And then you have A minor, D minor, G7, C7, right? So another perfect example of a circle of fifth, or a circle of, in this case, perfect fourth, if we want to force and see the main interval that was dominating the texture, right? So we're seeing a good example of motivic development, right? Which is very coherent, and here it's guiding throughout all of these notes. That's a fourth, well, that's the circle, and that continues from there. So we basically have this circle and then this other one, which goes back actually to the same F. Right, and the melody is filled with fourths. It's all over the place. You can see there fourth, it's that one. And as a matter of fact, that F goes to C again. So it's descending, very, very, very clearly oriented, moving downwards. And in this case, it leads even to a lower note. It leads to a C, right? Actually, the descending logic or feel of this can be felt by looking at how this first half, the D minor, is now presented lower. Right, so it's a descending sequence basically. So we have second lower transposition. And well, it sounds very compelling. Now, clearly, as I said at the beginning, the range expands. So this was a really small, narrow range. We had this octave and a sixth, and now we're going towards 2 octaves, 3 octaves, and a fifth. So it's way wider, and that even increases further in A3. Right, so A3 is like the widest so far. We keep increasing range, and that's kind of remarkable. It points to a very big logic. So here we have an increase of range, right? And this goes basically to prove the fact that Debussy, even for pieces like this that look very expressive, very minimalistic. They look almost like an improvisation, right? They are not random. They are not random by any chance of the imagination. Debussy very well thought which notes to put and gave them a very good reason of logic. I mean, one could argue, of course, you could improvise just thinking of the interval. Of course, you could improvise just by thinking of a fourth and build it up. But to think of so many parameters at the same time and to think of the fact that we're having this ambiguous tonality, then we keep increasing, then we have a descending sequence, it's clearly one of the brightest minds only can do that. So Debussy here is showing his genius to us, and it's a very, very beautiful piece. So once we end this section, in which, by the way, the rhythm is altered, and this is another very beautiful thing about this. A lot of the times when I see students write compositions and nocturnes, they try to do either one of these two things. They do harmonic changes all the time, every single bar, and when they do these changes, they try to do them at a similar pace. So if we're having, let's say, a 4/4, we would have 1, 2, 1, 2, 2 chords per bar, for instance. And it's going to be always like that. And it would establish this rhythm of change. And that's not the case in Debussy. First, Debussy doesn't even start with the tonic. He starts with this G minor. He's staying for 6 bars without change on this G minor. And he is not ashamed of repeating the same left hand without any change. So after 6 bars of this, which is a very extended period of chord, then we have 1 chord per bar and then 2 bars per chord, which is also quite flexible. So we compress, then we expand again. Now, Debussy goes even further. Now he's using like a dotted rhythm, because you have 6 beats of this, 2 beats of G, and then 6 again of D. And furthermore, now the rhythm is even faster. It's very traditionally changing every 2 beats. Right? So this basically teaches us that we should avoid being very systematic at changing chords every single bar or every 2 beats, every 3 beats, but rather use the harmony to create different feelings and to depict different functions. So in this case, we are starting with this mood, painting this mood of suspense. We don't have to change chords. We're just staying with the same chord for a long time. Now, if we want to give some movement, instead, like listen how boring this would be if I would just change chord every bar. It's very predictable. But if you want to give movement and diversify the sonority of the piece, use dotted rhythms like this. And now fast, and again slow. Fast, slow. And that expansion of slow and fast really provides you with a very interesting sonority and development. So we're moving forward. Now Debussy is clearly using accidentals, and it's an accidental that I really like. It's the flat 7, right? And still we're in pianissimo. So A3 harmonically is the simplest of all. It's just 2 chords. It's this beautiful F9 dominant, and then it's this B flat major. That's all it is. And you have it for 8 bars. no harmonic changes. Now, so far it kind of suits well because Debussy is expanding. So far the largest arpeggio was this one, D minor 9th, and it was 6 beats. Now we have the largest one, which is 8 beats long, and it's this F. Right, and it kind of stretches and increases the range to the maximum. So at this point, well, not much can be said about this harmony. It's also particularly interesting that he's using F major for the first time as the downbeat, because all of the other phrases didn't start on an F. This one started in G, that one started in D. Now finally we have F, and it's an F altered chord. It's F dominant. It's the dominant of the fourth. Now you might be wondering, what sonority is that? Well, that eventually does sound like F, but it sounds like F mixolydian. And you might be wondering, what is F mixolydian? How does F mixolydian sound? Well, F mixolydian is the major scale where we have the flat seventh. So instead of that cadence, we have, right, which is a much more modern Debussy sounding impressionistic sonority. And in spite of not having C minor as such anywhere, it does sound as C minor is implied there. Well, you can see it there. Of course, F is in the bass prevailing, but that emphasis on C is creating that dominant. So that's the dominant of a mixolydian key, C to F. And it's much more modern than a typical cadence. That's the classical one, and that's the mixolydian, right? And the right hand, I mean, well, how do we explain F going to B flat? Of course, we explain it by fourth. There is no other interval so far that is guiding the discourse. So A, D, G, C, F, D flat. Perfect. It's all in there. And now the melody is this descending fourth that's undulating away. That melody, it's not new. We already heard it. So that melody is the same opening. Right, so that was A1, and now we have right, and it continued, and now it continues as right, it just builds up. So rather than label it as A3, which is a new section, I would give it A1 prime, because in reality it's a variation. It's a variation of the first one. So in reality, Debussy is doing A VA within the A section, a ternary form. Right, so what I really like about this is the fact how Debussy deals and treats arpeggios. This is a very good lesson on how to write arpeggios and what to avoid. A lot of the times, especially for non-pianists, I see that when they write for piano, sometimes they write arpeggios like this. That definitely sounds odd. And what's the problem with that? The problem is in the first octave. So when we look at the arpeggios, a lot of the times that first octave, that range is really muddy, and it's not gonna give us a clear sound, the sonority that we need for enhancing and supporting a strong harmony. So in that case, try always to avoid that range and do octaves or fifths in that lowness. That's exactly what Debussy does. So he started with an octave, and he's not even doing thirds here, which could sound fine. He's doing a fifth, and that's, by all reasoning, it's the same logic that guides the harmonic series, the overtone series. So when you have a note, these are the tones that are implied. It's usually within the same note you would have an octave, a fifth, and a fourth, and then the third. And Debussy is kind of trying to imitate that resonance by maximizing it with that open white fifth octave there, and followed by a fifth. And in the right hand there is another very beautiful ingredient, which is this E flat. So if I omit the E flat, it sounds like this. It's a beautiful melody and it seems all to work fine, but it's missing part of its harmony. Now, there are different ways you can harmonize a melody. You could do it by thirds. Would sound like that, or by sixths. But as you can see, none of them really work well there. What Debussy does instead is he picks a pedal point, an E flat, which is that new note, the note that defines the Mixolydian mode, and he uses that note as a pedal point to highlight certain sonorities. This one, and this one particularly, right? And here we have the C, for instance, D, which is, this inner melody is really fascinating. So we have E flat, C, D, F, D, and even that melody, which is the inner melody, is of the range of a fourth. Right? You have this C, which is the lowest note in that melody, and the F, which is the highest, and that makes a fourth. Right? So even that little detail there, Debussy left us with this little treasure of harmony in counterpoint. All right, let's continue, because A3 doesn't have much. Well, it's like this buildup, it increases and builds on the previous material. Let's go to A4. So A4 has as a function, its main role is to modulate or make a cadence on C. Why does Debussy end on C? Because he ends on the dominant, which is kind of giving us the same feel of a sonata form, where you would have the tonic and you end on the dominant, or as we saw in Beethoven's sonata, on the relative major in that case. Right, so we start with A4. A4 sounds like this, and that's a really dissonant sonority. Right, so the first thing that we should ask ourselves is, what is that chord, right? There are different ways you can think of it. For me, the way that I always thought about it is the augmented F chord on top of a G bass. F augmented on top of G. But still, that doesn't really satisfy any chord that we know of, because why he does G instead of F? And I could play F and you'll notice immediately that it doesn't fit. And there's something particular about that G that changes the whole meaning and function of the chord. So when we have a G in the bass and the seventh, it really sounds like a G7 chord. Furthermore, it even sounds like a G9 chord. But in this case, we have a flat 5 and no third. That's basically the particularity of that. So I'll play the chords for you. If we were to see the G9 chord, it sounds like this. That's G9. Now G9 flat 5, that's closer, that has already the augmented chord. And G9 flat 9, no third, is that chord. We don't have the third. That's exactly the sonority we have here. Right. And that G dominant transitions smoothly to something that we can either label as D minor, because really that's the chord that we're seeing here, or we could say, all right, he's staying still in G, and all he does it's a G minor ninth, or a G ninth without no third, right? Which is arguably also possible, but I'd rather feel of it and believe that this is actually a separate chord and that G belongs to the previous. So we have G, now we have D minor to G. But then there it's settling on that G9 sonority. And the G9 eventually has the third, right? So it becomes G9 very, very clearly. And G9 is important. Why? Because G9 is exactly where we go to C. So in a way, all of this passage is a very different approach to harmony, in which we are doing a dominant, standing on the dominant for several bars. Let's highlight it's G1 bar, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bars, and then that resolves into C. And of course the relationship between G and C, it's again that of a fourth, right? So we have there that harmonic progression, which is kind of remarkable, right? It kind of connects this B flat to F, D to G, then C, F, B flat, and then G, C. Right? That's kind of the outline. And in order to make this G sound interesting, he's combining different sonorities. So here's playing with the altered flat 9, with the normal G9, no third, altered, no third, and then we have the third. And that goes to C major. Right, where are these materials taken from? Well, the materials on the right hand clearly sound very similar to that melody. We have it now. Right. Right, now it's just the answer of that. That was going downwards, this is going upwards. But despite of that, well, this is actually also remarkable because it's the first time that the fourth, which was always a perfect fourth, becomes a diminished fourth. And it creates a new harmony. And Debussy is emphasizing that. So this diminished fourth, it's a remarkable progression in development of the opening idea that was always this straightforward fourth. Well, the fourths are filling the entire writing. We have the A, D there, and that's the same AA as that A. And down below, he's going by thirds here and resolving to C. So we have F to C, right? All built on fourths. And the beautiful thing about this is that really becomes the climax. So the moment that Debussy changes the interval and breaks it, we have a climactic point, we have the climax, which is the maximum point of tension. And for the first time, Debussy is using forte. If I'm not mistaken, we had a little bit of mezzo forte there, piano, he was playing with dynamics a little bit, pianissimo in that interesting variation with the key range. But now he's playing with that forte piano. Forte piano is clearly the climactic point. And I would argue that even the second time that we play it, we should play it louder, because it's this reiteration that makes it stronger. And after that, the texture dissolves and starts to fade away, and it just becomes this beautiful arpeggio. Now, speaking of which, arpeggios here are again dealt with very unique shapes and forms. So Debussy is giving every single section a different feel. The opening, we discussed it, is this syncopation. Here is this split arpeggio. Now we have these continuous arpeggios that's undulating and then ascending, right? So undulation and ascension. Now this is a really long undulation. Right? When he needs more notes, like in this case, he's doing it 2 times, like boom, 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 almost like a timpani there in the bass. section. And then here this becomes very Chopin-like, right? So this is typical form. But in order not to bore the ear, he could have ended like this. But somehow he came up with the idea of building these wide arpeggios that goes and stretches even an octave higher and reaches up to that high C that connects with this other C. And the smooth modulation of C major to C minor really makes this a very special moment. So that's basically section A. There isn't a lot to it, but it's very well written. The very few notes that Debussy writes are extremely well thought. Now, when we arrive to B1, the melody doesn't change its logic. It's based on that rhythm, but it's the inverted fourth, right? So we have that. And the right hand is doing the harmony. Right? And still we have that motive. It's everywhere. That motive of the 5-1, right? So fourth or fifth in this case with the inversion. Right? So Debussy is doing that. And harmonically, there are only 4 chords in this section. So we start with C minor. He moves to D major, does again C minor, and from C minor we are going to C augmented. So this C augmented C sharp 5 is really special, and it's kind of changing the entire sonority, and it's reminding us a little bit of this other augmented sonority we had there. That sound connects to this. Now, this is for the first time that Debussy is not following quarto harmony, because from C he goes to D. Right. And what is so special about this harmony? Firstly, that in spite of writing the chord of C minor, we're clearly not in C minor. If we were to think of what scale these 2 chords belong to, it's clearly G minor. Right. And in a way, G minor, the key of G minor, was already present at the beginning. We had this G Dorian, right? So the entire piece was sounding so far a lot like a piece in G. All of this G, G, G. No? And now we have, for the first time, G minor, well, G harmonic minor, although G itself is not appearing anywhere. So he is only doing half cadences. And these half cadences build and construct this very interesting scale. So some people call it the double harmonic. Was the harmonic scale. What in reality this is a Dorian scale with a sharp 4. Right? So it has these that interval. And that augmented second is really spicy here, and Debussy is playing with it and presenting it in a very direct and exotic manner there in the melody, which in a way is the opposite fourth that we haven't seen. So far we saw the diminished fourth, and now we're seeing the augmented fourth. Right? Fourth becomes an augmented fourth. In once that is achieved, that really big tension, well, we still see chromatic fourths. We see here another diminished fourth, which creates this augmented chord, diminished fourth. So the melody in this case, we actually haven't commented the previous ones that much, but here this was a closing sentence, so that's kind of the definition of the first A1. After that, we have here this one, which can be labeled either as a period or as a sentence, because you have a repetition of that. But since the opening idea is more clearly repeated afterwards, I would go with a sentence. In this case, it's an open sentence. The openness of the sentence is mostly manifested in the fact that it ends on the dominant 5, right? So that's open, and this was F, closing sentence, open sentence. Now the next part, which is this mixolydian, it's dealt again as a sentence, but I would argue that this is not a closing, it's a modulating sentence, which makes it by definition open, because it's not very clearly closing, unless you see it as B flat, in which case it's clearly closing on B flat. So I'll leave that up to you, but this sentence is clearly modulating. It has this opening idea and then the B flat as a closing idea. And finally, we have a closing idea with this closing sentence, which goes and closes with a perfect cadence on a C major, 5-1. So the 4 sentences that create the first section, it's a closing sentence on the tonic, an open sentence on the dominant, a modulating sentence on the subdominant, and then a closing sentence, this time, since we've modulated, on the dominant. Right? Now, B1, with this new harmony, it's clearly not a sentence. It's no longer a sentence. It does look at it because you have the repetition of the descending. You have it twice. So it should be dealt and treated as a period. This is a period, in this case open period, because it opens and ends with an augmented chord, this augmented chord. So it's this open period. That goes to a dominant. We have opening idea and closing idea. Opening idea again. And then we have this C augmented. And that leads us to this next part, which is in A minor, right? This beautiful A minor chord. A minor 7. So what else can we say about this? Well, the first thing is that the accompaniment is in the right hand, and it's a split accompaniment. There are 2 parts. They move by fourths. You have that fourth there. And here's an arpeggio. And it's for the first time very irregular and very consistent and very incisive on the subdivision of division of the measure. So we have beats 1 and 3 are with a strong emphasis. Prior to that, that was avoided. We would have 1 stress every bar. Now we have 2 stresses per bar. And even within that, Debussy is managing to create diversity, because you have this, which is 4 beats, 4 impulses of E flat, and then we have this slower rhythm. So all the time Debussy is moving with the stretches of the different divisions that you have of rhythm. You can have it shorter, faster. Here, for instance, this is faster, then we're slowing down again. Right? Faster, slow again. So that's pretty much what happens here in B1. Let's keep moving forward. B2. So B2 continues with a left hand melody. And it ends on F major. A very perfect and beautiful cadence in F major. So that's very interesting, because structurally this contradicts a lot of things. Usually when we think of pieces and structure, we would say I would have a section A that would go to maybe a dominant, and then B I would modulate and return back to the tonic, and then have my section recapitulation, right? But that's not the case. In this case, Debussy is clearly ending on the tonic, and he's ending halfway through. So that kind of poses important challenges on whether we're properly defining this as B3. Maybe because of its distinct nature, we could be saying that this is a different section, and it has more of this developmental meaning because it's kind of building and developing around ideas. But well, let's try to first close and understand what B2 really means. So B2 starts with this A7, goes to G sharp diminished, and then that goes to C dominant 7th sus4, right? So this is a very, very unique sonority. We're having A minor 7th, G sharp diminished, and C7 with sus4, right? Sus4. That C7 goes to F major 7th. That goes to G minor 9th. We have eventually C7, and that goes to F. Right. So this latter bit, it's a common progression, is what we call a 2-5-1. We have 1 here, 2 there, 5, and 1. And in reality, that's a circle of fifths of its own, and it provides us basically with the same interval that we were seeing throughout the entire piece, which was this G, C, F progression by fourth going downwards. Well, in this case, by fifths, as they're inverted. Right? The only thing that surprises us a little bit is this opening with the A minor, G sharp diminished, and C sus4. This is very unusual, very unique. And it sounds pretty much like jazz music from the 40s. Despite the fact that, well, that type of music was written 40 or 30 years, at least 30 years after this piece. So we can already breathe the new harmony that Debussy was foretelling. In that F major 7 is very jazzy. That G ninth. That could be clearly a progression that you could make a jazz standard upon. Well, you could turn it into ragtime or whatever. So Debussy here plays with the same interval. We have the fourth. It's almost, well, it's not almost, it's the same melody a step down. And now you would expect that he does, he finishes the scale down, right? So that's going back to F. In reality, this is a very coherent and transparent writing. So we have this melody, now we repeat it a step lower, and then a step lower with a descending scale. That's all it has. The beauty about it is how he harmonizes it, because if I were to do it without that clever idea, I would do something like that, which is a direct copy and paste a step below. But he does this instead. So what is happening? The right hand is going upwards. We have A going to B, B going to C, C going to D. And the distance between A and D, you've guessed it, is of a fourth. Debussy is insisting on that interval again. And he introduces, by the way, this A as a reminder. So we hear it in the harmony. We really hear it. And that's what happens here. It's fantastically written. It's a very beautiful passage. And it's characterized by that contrary motion counterpoint. And this actually goes as an argument to all of those people that say, well, Debussy wasn't a good counterpoint composer. This is a proof of, I would say, a world-class counterpoint level. So it's really well done and well dealt with this chord progression. Now, B3. B3 is very similar harmonically to something we heard before. So if we recall this, C minor, that's like C minor to D, that 4-5 chord progression. Now we are seeing it similarly with in the key of A, right? So B3, technically, it's a condensation of B1, right? And he's condensing that B1 material that we heard before. So let's look at this theme. The first thing that strikes me about this theme is the fact that it plays with a metric feel. So when I hear the first time 1, 2, 3, 1, I would expect that to be the downbeat. And that's not the case, because he is doing 3, 2, there's 2 chords, and then again we have that chord repeated. So it's playing with the downbeat. Right? It's playing with the emphasis and moving around, creating a rhythmic ambiguity. And then that idea is used to end an F major with a 2-5-1. Right? You might be wondering, but how is this 2-5-1? Well, it's a G13, a C9, and an F major, right? Where is the 13? Well, it's that 6 that we're seeing there. Right, so that chord is, then that goes to 9, and F major. Right, and at the beginning we had, as I said earlier, this alternation between E major and D minor, which carries on for the next part as well. So here we go back to this D minor E major. That automatically turns this into what we can call a period. And it's a modulation period. It has a modulation. And that leads to this. It's a one-of-a-kind cadence. It's a very smooth 5-1 in the key of E major. And Debussy manages to do that with very, very clean progressions. Well, that's chordal harmony, which explains perfectly the entire passage, and we have again that interval of fourths now in this harmonic feel, right? So those are the fourths. But what's happening here harmonically is more sophisticated. So let's break down each and every one of these chords. The first one is E major. Then we have this F sharp minor. Then we have a diminished chord. So that diminished chord could be labeled as A sharp diminished. Then we have E major, F sharp minor, G sharp minor, and E major. All of that is happening in one. So we have E major, and that on top of a pedal point. And you might be wondering, where are these chords coming from? Well, they're coming from the melody. So the melody is, there are different ways we can harmonize it. The easiest one would be with 1-4-1, 1-4-5-1. But Debussy does, instead of the 4, a 2 chord, and then he has to give it color, which is that diminished chord. And then he goes back to 1, so. And then we have just this parallel harmonization, which is afterwards just taken by the right hand. And what is that? That's a very beautiful combination of the opening idea. Because if we look at the opening harmony, it was this first inverted triad. And now that concept of triads moving downwards is retaken here. And he's using the same organization of intervals, right? So the same intervallic organization. Now, let's look at the melody. So the melody does F, E, E, F, E, E, F, E, E. Just a half step, harmonized, which we explained where it comes from that. Right from there. And then the melody has again the fourths. And the fourths are also guiding the harmonic progression. Then that's again that same movement of the fourth, and eventually, well, a few more fourths that we see harmonically there in that structure, some melodically too. So the phrase itself is a mysterious one because it repeats a lot the materials. It has this clear repetition in the high range, and Debussy's at this moment playing with a dialogue of a choral. For the first time we're hearing block chords, and it's a beautiful example of what could be a great contrast to what are these continuous arpeggios, right? And the way he achieves that is by first the transition he had was arpeggios, but the second transition is that emptiness, silence, and really enhanced with a syncopation. We haven't heard that syncopation back from the beginning when he was doing that G there, right? Syncopated. So now that syncopation here is magnified, and I'll put it with green, the same color we had there. And in a way, that syncopation is also the feel we have here. With that rhythm, if we were to tie those notes, they're like tied there, syncopated, right? But well, this clearest example of syncopation is evidently in B4, where Debussy is doing all of those notes with the offbeat feel, right? So this is a great example of how to create contrast. You just go with the original materials, you condense them intervallically and present them as a choral, as a 4-part writing, and play with that ambiguity, harmonic ambiguity. Right, let's go with B4 now. And then we're going back to A. It's incredibly beautiful. It's very well written. So all of this kind of, with the key signature change, sounds indeed like a development section. And we could argue that really that development is starting from this B3, because the B idea clearly closes after that open period. So I would dare actually not to call this as B3, but I would label this as a little development. So we had A, B development, and that development is really what he retakes in the coda, right? That development idea. And it's development because in a way he is reusing the materials that we had before, but at the same time it's development because it's modulating more, it's a new texture, and in spite of being new, it's based on everything that we had before. So it's like a little condensation. And the development has obviously different parts. So we have this first one, which is D1, the development first section. You have D2, and maybe that with a key signature again we can label as D3. So now we're looking at this second part of the development. It starts very diatonically. It starts in a beautiful E major key signature. And in this E major, well, Debussy is standing on the dominant. Standing on the dominant with that parallel harmony. You have parallel sixth chords, which are first inversion. And then he is expanding more with some added chords, added seconds like that. Right? And where's that melody from? Well, it seems like a new melody. It's a little bit based around that concept. You have that triplet feel, but at the same time, it's new. It has evidently the interval that we were seeing all the time, right? But it's more loose. It's more based on these arpeggios, right? This is the harmonic structure. So that theme is repeated again here, which makes it a period, right? That's what that repetition there of the material makes it a period, and it's a modulating one. So we have modulation. Now in this case, the period is leading us to a new key, in this case C major, right? That's what we're seeing here, C major. And the way that Debussy achieves this is by a very, very subtle modulation. So we are starting with that sonority of B, but now the G becomes flat. And that beautiful chord comes in. Happens again. So what is that? That's a half diminished chord. This half diminished chord that you have there, it's C sharp. If you were to write it properly, it would be C sharp minor 7th flat 5 with the bass G. Right, that C sharp minor 7th flat 5 with the bass G goes to B major with the bass F sharp, and that keeps going through a scale. It kind of basically does the fourth. Right. And it has this beautiful contrary motion because that opens up. Right? Debussy is basically doing that 2 times. This makes it a very strong statement because it kind of opens up, does a crescendo there, and then we're going back again to the same new melody. Right, which is now in the left hand. So that's why probably D3 there doesn't make much sense. Well, it's all this part of development, right? So I would label it as D2 prime. And now the melody has been presented above, so we can put it here pink. That's the melody. It's repeated there with that beautiful quartal presentation, and now it's repeated below, and then we have it above. So it's always there present. And here probably Debussy does one of his most unique textures, which is this undulation, which goes already with an emiola, because if we think about it, the triplet should have done to have the repetition every 3, but you have it every 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That polyrhythm has the second, the minor second. We will know where it comes from. It's from there. We have that same Fe, sorry, and then we have this, which is just common 5/1. What makes it special is that melody that includes the 13th and the 6th, right? So then that moves down, and instead of resolving to C major, it resolves to C dominant 7th. And then that's the end of this development section, or if you want to call it the B section. So maybe development isn't just the label we should go there. So that C7 chord is ending there, and what's all this section about is the standing on the dominant. You have this pedal point G, you have it now down below, so it's moving from up to down there. And with this, Debussy is kind of showing us how he can move through these different standing on the dominants. The first time he's standing on the dominant of A minor, we have. Then he's doing the dominant of E. And after that, he's doing the dominant of C. And that's the one that he settles on to resolve it to the dominant of F. And after that, we're going back to the beginning. Right? So this clearly is probably one of the points of maximum tension, in spite of being labeled as piano. I mean, there are two places, but if you look at the dynamics, Debussy writes forte here, which was this first climax. And he doesn't write any forte afterwards. So for me, the maximum point of tension is clearly this one. When in D2, he's trying this texture with that open 5/1, 5/1 chord progression. But theoretically, it's just a piano. And that's kind of pointing us that in Debussy's time, the climax didn't have to be the loudest to be performed, but it was indeed structurally placed before the recapitulation, and it had that maximum intensity of harmony. So Debussy is playing with a very delicate climactic point, but without a doubt, this is the climactic point of the entire piece. After which, well, the texture dissolves. We're tuning actually the highest range. We're going there to this high G. The previous highest note was an F sharp. And from this F, we go to G. Maybe Debussy didn't want that to sound particularly loud, and he wrote piano. But it definitely demands of a louder sound. And after that, this kind of resembles a lot the type of arpeggios we saw earlier. So we can connect it to this one. Well, that arpeggio is now becoming this. And it's in triplets, right? It's fascinating because actually, the triplet motion that we're seeing here, the density of the triplet motion, wasn't appearing anywhere before. So before we were just seeing eighth notes, normal eighth notes, where the motion actually was slowing down to quarter notes. And from these quarter notes with a syncopation, by introducing the triplets, we end up in this climactic point with the maximum fastest rhythm, which is this constant flow of triplets. After which, we go back and transition to the eighth notes. Notice how beautifully Debussy thinks of this transition, because it goes with triplets. And then now we are not with triplets, we're with eighth notes, but he still groups them as three. So in order to create this type of metric ambiguity and connect better those two parts, right? Well, A1 doesn't have anything remarkable about it except this breaking texture, where the arpeggio is flowing between right and left. And I think that's partly connection to the climactic point we had before. So that highest G we had there, it's the one that reappears again now. He tries to resolve that tension because it was really cut abruptly. And from that G, we're slowly going back to F, to E, and then A, and connecting downwards. So that's what happens in this part. Harmonically is the same. In A2, we have a harmonic change. Debussy is doing D minor. And as I said earlier, it does E flat. And this E flat, it does really sound like E flat Lydian. So E flat Lydian is the major scale with sharp 4, or raised 4th degree. So what is that? If you have major scale, E flat major, and now we have E Lydian with the A natural. And that's what we're hearing and feeling through that little F major chord that appears there. So it's E flat, and it becomes F major. It's E flat major second. And that's a very beautiful Lydian sonority. Now, you might be wondering, what is Lydian doing here, and how do I explain the fact that Debussy is going now to have that? Well, mainly, if we think about it, this is a color resource that Debussy is using to diversify a little bit the field that he had earlier. But at the same time, this is a compositional technique, because this E flat Lydian eventually, through a circle of fifths, goes from E flat to A goes to D, and D goes to G. So he's using it to go in a very classical and fast movement to end on 2-5-1 of G minor. This is a G minor 2-5-1. And that is the main reason why he does that. So it allows him, apart from giving harmonic diversity, to achieve through a circle of fifths this cadence. Why does he do G minor here when in the original development we had D minor? Well, that kind of explains partly the sonata feel. Because if in the sonata usually we have this dominant or tension, in this case is D, that's resolved to a tonic. Now, the strange thing is that it's G and not F. But if we remember correctly, G is basically the excuse that Debussy is always using from the very beginning of the piece to be in the key of F major. So this is, in fact, a recapitulation of that initial idea. Although he uses it to go to D, it now allows him to go to F major. And there the piece, right? So it's kind of very straightforward. There isn't a lot of secrets there hidden. You have the descending scale there in that C to F. It works marvelously. But the sensitivity with which this is achieved is remarkable, because that leap, it's completely unpredictable. You wouldn't expect... This is the expected ending, but he does this. And then ends with a third above. That's a very suspenseful and beautiful sonority, and kind of modernistic. Now, the typical cadence that you would find. So that's basically what's happening in this piece. And I believe that it's a remarkable example of nocturne writing, of what you could call a romantic piece that's borderlining the modern sonorities of modal harmony and impressionism. And I think that in this case, Debussy is proving all of his mastery, because in spite of being a very simple piece that sounds, well, apparently now that we've analyzed, it doesn't look that simple. It actually even has some formular ambiguity. But in spite of sounding very straightforward and very direct, this melody with accompanied melody, it's only featuring a little bit of accompanied melody in the left hand here with counterpoint, and then some block chords, homophonic writing, and a little bit of counterpoint here, just very little counterpoint. So it's very straightforward, not too difficult to play, relatively simple, and you can side read it and play it, and intermediate pianists play this. But at the same time, it has so much beauty and so much compositional insight that proves that Debussy was really careful, not just with the expressivity of the sound by trying to achieve these sweet and tender sonorities, but also with the harmonic and melodic intervallic logic that's guiding this entire writing. So I really encourage students to study more of Debussy and look into these pieces. And this is going to be the end of the analysis. So if you like this video, please like it and write a comment, because I really appreciate it if you made it this far, watched all of it, where you specify the things that you probably didn't understand or you like further clarification. And also, I'd like to hear from you what other composers you'd like me to analyze on this channel, or if you'd like to have any suggestions of things you'd like to be seen featured here. So apart from this, I'd like to be composing live on a video, so like explaining how the compositional process works, and also maybe in future videos analyzing my own pieces, right? But before doing that, I'd like to establish like the main styles and talk a little bit about Baroque music or classical music. So probably that's what we're going to be seeing in the next videos. So if you know, again, people that might be interested in this, please share this with them, and see you in the next video. So have a productive week and writing and listening to music.